I told you to stay away! You think you can just come onto my property and do this? You are going to regret this!
Now, before I even start this story, I need y'all to understand something. This ranch, it ain't just property to me. It's not just some piece of land with a fence around it. This place is my family. My grandfather cleared this ground with nothing but a mule and a plow. My father built the barn that still stands today with his own 2 hands, board by board, nail by nail. I grew up running through those fields barefoot, chasing fireflies in the summer, hauling hay before the sun even came up in the winter. Every single inch of this land has a memory attached to it, and every single inch of it is legally, rightfully, and undeniably mine. So when I tell you what happened the day I came home, I need you to understand why it hit me the way it did. I had been away for 3 weeks, had some business out of state. Nothing unusual. I travel from time to time, but no matter where I go, this ranch is always home base. Always has been, always will be. So I'm driving back, windows down, country roads, that good kind of tired where you just want to pull into your driveway, sit on your porch, and breathe in that familiar air. You know what I mean? That feeling of almost being home. And then I turned onto my road. And right away, something felt off. There were lights, red and blue, flashing, cutting through the dust. At first, I thought maybe there was an accident nearby. Maybe somebody ran off the road or hit a deer. That kind of thing happens out here all the time. But as I got closer, I realized those lights weren't on the road. They were on my property. 3 police cruisers parked right there on my land. Doors open, officers milling around like they were setting up for something, radios crackling. The whole scene looked like it had been going on for a while, like I was the last one to arrive at my own house. And then I saw her.
Standing right in the middle of it all, like she was directing traffic at a crime scene, was a woman in a sharp purple suit. Now, I don't know who picks out a purple suit to go stand in a dirt field, but she did. And she wasn't just standing there. She was pointing at my barn, pointing at my fence line, pointing at things like she was conducting some kind of inspection. I pulled in slow, put the truck in park, and I just sat there for a second with the engine still running, staring through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was looking at, because it didn't make sense, not one bit of it. I turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The second my boots hit that gravel, I felt it, that crunch underneath my feet, the same sound I've heard 10,000 times before. But this time, it sounded different. It sounded like a reminder, like the ground itself was saying, "This is yours. Don't forget that." I didn't. I started walking toward the barn, slow and steady. Wasn't in a rush, wasn't trying to cause a scene, but I also wasn't about to act like a stranger on my own land. One of the officers saw me first. Young guy, probably hadn't been on the force very long. He looked at me, then nudged the officer next to him. Their eyes locked onto me like I was the person they'd been waiting for. But before either of them could open their mouth, she turned around, the woman in the purple suit. Sharp eyes, tight jaw, lips pressed together like she was biting back something mean. Her whole posture screamed control. Not the kind you earn, the kind you demand. The kind that doesn't ask if you agree. It just expects you to fall in line. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Finally, you need to leave, immediately." Now, I want you to really sit with that for a second. I had just driven 300 miles to come home. I'm standing on land that my family has owned for over 4 decades. And a woman I have never seen before in my entire life is telling me to leave. My own property, my own ranch, my own home. For a split second, and I mean a split second, I actually thought she might be joking. Like maybe this was some kind of weird prank. Maybe a neighbor set this up. Maybe I was on some hidden camera show and somebody was about to jump out from behind the barn laughing. But nobody laughed. Nobody jumped out. She just stood there, staring at me, dead serious. So I let out a small breath, half laugh, half disbelief, shook my head slowly and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, you are standing on my land." And that's when she lifted the clipboard, held it up like it was a badge, like it gave her authority, like a piece of paper on a clipboard somehow outranked a 40-year-old land deed. "I'm Karen," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "President of the Homeowners Association. This property is in violation of multiple community standards, and you have ignored every notice we've sent." I just blinked, looked around slowly. At the barn my father built, at the fencing we put up ourselves, post by post, at the horse trailer sitting where it always sits, at the wide open land stretching out in every direction, far as the eye could see. Then I looked back at her. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "there is no HOA here. There never has been." And she smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a polite smile, a slow, confident, deliberate smile. The kind of smile that says, "Oh, you poor, ignorant man, you have no idea what's about to happen." "Oh," she replied, her chin tilting upward, "there is now." Before I could even process that, one of the officers stepped forward, hands on his belt, professional tone. "Sir," he said, "we received a formal complaint regarding property violations and refusal to comply with HOA enforcement. We're here to follow up." Violations, eviction threats, HOA enforcement. Those words hit me like a wall. Not because they scared me, but because they didn't belong here. None of them did. It was like hearing someone speak a foreign language in the middle of your living room. It just didn't fit. My horse was beside me at this point. She'd wandered over from the pasture, probably sensing the tension. She nudged my arm gently, and I ran my hand along her neck. Steady, calm. That horse has been with me through a lot, and she always knows when something's wrong. Karen stepped closer. Her heels on a ranch, crunched against the dirt like they were offended by it. "You've ignored multiple notices," she snapped, pointing her finger directly at my face, close enough that I could have swatted it away. "You are no longer in compliance. This land is now under HOA jurisdiction, and you will follow the rules or face legal consequences." I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't raise my voice. I just leaned in, maybe an inch or two, and said real quiet, "You mean fake notices?" And something happened in her face, just a flicker, quick, like a candle caught in a draft. Her expression shifted just for half a second, and I saw it. Behind all that confidence, behind that suit and that clipboard and that rehearsed authority, there was hesitation. And right there, in that tiny crack in her armor, I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a bureaucratic mix-up. This wasn't some honest mistake that a phone call to the county could fix. She wasn't just wrong. She was lying. Deliberately, intentionally, strategically lying. And standing right there on my family's land, surrounded by police officers who had been called under false pretenses, I realized something else. This wasn't going to end with me explaining myself. This was going to end with her being exposed. Because in less than 10 minutes, everything that was pointing at me was about to flip completely.
And she had absolutely no idea what was coming.
Now, at this point, most people would think, all right, simple enough. Show your papers, prove you own the land, clear the whole thing up, and everybody goes home. And honestly, that's exactly what should have happened. But Karen, she wasn't interested in simple. She wasn't interested in the truth. She was interested in winning. And there is a very big difference between those two things. Because while I was standing there, calm and collected, trying to figure out the most reasonable way to handle this situation, she was ramping up, not backing down, not reconsidering, not even pausing to think. She was getting louder. She started listing off violations like she had rehearsed them in front of a mirror, like she'd spent days, maybe weeks, preparing for this exact moment. "Unregistered livestock," she announced, gesturing toward the pasture where my horses were grazing. "Unauthorized structures," she continued, pointing at the barn, the same barn that's been standing on this land since before I was born. "Improper land use, failure to maintain visual standards, non-compliance with community regulations." Each phrase delivered with more authority than the last, each word sharper, more rehearsed, more calculated. And I'll be honest with you, if you were a stranger, if you were just some passerby who didn't know the history, didn't know the law, didn't know this land, it would have sounded convincing. It would have sounded official. She had the suit, she had the clipboard, she had the posture, she had the tone. But I wasn't a stranger, and I knew better. So instead of arguing, instead of raising my voice, instead of matching her energy, I did the thing that liars fear most. I went and got the facts. I turned without saying a word. Didn't rush, didn't storm off. Just walked. Slow, steady steps back toward my truck. I could feel her eyes on my back the entire way. I could feel the officers watching.
Everybody waiting to see what I was going to do next. I opened the driver's side door, reached into the glove compartment, and pulled out a folder. Now this folder, let me tell you about this folder. I've kept it in my truck for years. My dad always told me, son, keep your papers close. You never know when somebody's going to try to tell you that what's yours ain't yours. I thought he was being paranoid. Turns out, he was being prophetic. Inside that folder was everything. The original land deed, dating back over 40 years. County approvals for every structure on the property. Permits for the barn, for the fencing, for the livestock. Tax records, survey maps, everything documented, everything legal, everything signed and stamped and filed with the proper authorities. I walked back over and handed the folder to the senior officer without a word, just held it out, let the paper do the talking. He opened it carefully, started flipping through pages, one by one, and as he read, I watched his expression change. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in his posture. His shoulders relaxed, his jaw unclenched. And then he looked up, first at me, then at Karen, then back down at the papers. And he flipped through a few more pages, just to be thorough, just to make sure. Because a good officer doesn't jump to conclusions. A good officer checks everything twice. When he was done, he closed the folder and turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his tone careful and measured, "can you provide documentation of this HOA? Articles of incorporation? Registration with the county? Anything official?" And for the first time since I'd arrived, silence. Not the comfortable kind, not the peaceful kind. The kind of silence that fills a room, or in this case a ranch, when someone's been caught and they know it. It only lasted a few seconds, but those few seconds said everything. Karen straightened her back, lifted her chin,
adjusted her grip on that clipboard like it was a shield. "It's newly formed," she said, quick and clipped. "We're still processing the paperwork. These things take time, and there's a proper procedure that—" Another officer stepped in. This one was older, more experienced. You could tell by the way he moved. Unhurried, unbothered, completely in control. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "is this HOA registered with the county? Yes or no?" No answer. She opened her mouth, closed it, shifted her weight from one heel to the other, and then she started talking again, but this time the words weren't sharp. They were scrambled. She was trying to explain something that didn't have an explanation, and that's when the cracks really started to show. Meanwhile, one of the younger officers had started walking around the property, not aggressively, just doing his job, observing, and after a minute or so he stopped near the barn. Something caught his eye. He called out, "Sir, can you come here a moment?" I walked over. He was standing in front of the barn wall, looking at a cluster of papers that had been pinned up, tacked right into the wood. Multiple copies of the same notice, printed on what looked like official letterhead, but when you looked closely, wasn't quite right. The formatting was off. The language was vague. There was no seal, no registration number, no county reference, just bold text and threatening language. "You said you've been away?" the officer asked. 3 weeks, I confirmed. He nodded slowly, running his finger along the edge of one of the notices. These were all placed recently, within the last week or two, based on the condition of the paper. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. We both knew exactly what that meant. Someone had come onto my property while I was gone and posted fake legal notices on my barn, trespassed on private land, manufactured evidence,
and then used that manufactured evidence to call the police and try to have me removed from my own home. I turned and looked at Karen. She wasn't smiling anymore. That sharp confidence she had when I first pulled up, gone, replaced by something tight and nervous. Her fingers were gripping that clipboard so hard her knuckles had gone white. Now the questions changed. The officers weren't asking me anything anymore. They were asking her. "Did you enter this property without the owner's permission? Did you post these notices yourself or direct someone else to do it? Do you have any legal authority, any authority at all, to enforce compliance on this man?" Karen tried to keep control. She tried to talk over them, tried to redirect the conversation, tried to use big words and procedural jargon to sound like she knew what she was doing. But it wasn't working. Because jargon doesn't hold up when there's nothing behind it. Confidence doesn't mean anything when the facts don't support it. And a purple suit and a clipboard don't make you the law. Then something else happened. One of the officers, the senior one, stepped away from the group, walked a few paces towards his cruiser and made a phone call. Short, quiet. I couldn't hear what he said, but I could see his face. And his face told me everything I needed to know. When he came back, he didn't address Karen first. He addressed the other officers, quietly, professionally. And then he turned to us all and said, loud and clear, "There is no HOA registered anywhere in this area. Not newly formed, not pending, not in process. Nothing." Those words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Heavy, thick, final. And Karen's face? I'll never forget it. That mask she'd been wearing, that armor of authority and entitlement, it didn't just crack, it collapsed. Right there, in front of everybody. You could see the panic flooding in behind her eyes. The calculation.
The desperate search for an exit that wasn't there. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly, her voice losing its edge. "You don't understand how these processes work. There are channels, there are systems." But it was too late. Way too late. Because whatever this was, whatever scheme, whatever power play, whatever twisted game she had been running, it was unraveling, fast. And the harder she pulled at the threads, the more it all came apart. And then, she made it worse. So much worse. Now, here's the thing about people like Karen. They don't know when to stop. Most people, when they realize they've been caught, when the walls are closing in and the facts are stacking up against them, they get quiet. They step back. They call a lawyer. They do the smart thing. Karen did not do the smart thing. Karen did the exact opposite of the smart thing. She lost control. Completely. Her voice went up 2 octaves. Her arms started flying. That clipboard she'd been clutching like a weapon, she was waving it around like she was trying to flag down a rescue helicopter. "You don't understand," she shouted. And I mean shouted, loud enough that my horses lifted their heads from across the pasture. "This land needs regulation. Someone has to enforce standards. You can't just let people do whatever they want out here. There have to be rules. There have to be consequences." And right there is where everything flipped for good. Because up until that moment, she'd been claiming she had authority. She'd been presenting herself as someone with legal standing, someone who represented an organization, someone who was just doing her job. But with those words, those desperate, panicked, unfiltered words, she stopped claiming authority. She admitted intent. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was making them up. She wasn't following the law. She was inventing her own. And she just told every officer standing on that ranch exactly that, without any legal right, without any jurisdiction, without any standing whatsoever. She had taken it upon herself to create a fake organization, post fake notices on private property, file a fake complaint with the police, and attempt to have a legal landowner removed from his own home. And she just confessed to all of it in one breathless outburst. The officers moved immediately. "Ma'am, step back. Now." Their tone had completely changed. This wasn't polite conversation anymore.
This wasn't "let's sort this out." This was official, firm, controlled, the kind of voice law enforcement uses when the situation has shifted from civil to criminal. They started documenting everything. One officer pulled out a camera and began photographing the fake notices still pinned to the barn wall. Click, click, click. Every single one. Close-ups of the text, the formatting, the fake letterhead. Another officer walked the perimeter, noting the condition of the fences, the gates, checking for any signs of tampering or damage. A third was on his radio, relaying information back to the station, requesting records, filing preliminary reports. This was no longer a complaint call. This was an investigation. And then, and this is the part that really got me, another officer approached from the road. He'd been sitting in his cruiser for a few minutes, and I hadn't paid much attention to him. But when he walked up, he was carrying a folder of his own. He gathered the other officers together, spoke quietly at first, then louder so everyone could hear. "This isn't the first time," he said. The air changed. Everyone went still. He opened the folder and started laying it out. There have been similar complaints filed in at least 3 other areas nearby. Same pattern. Someone shows up claiming to represent a homeowners association, posts violation notices, attempts to levy fines, threatens legal action. In one case, they actually tried to have someone's property seized through a fraudulent lien. I felt my jaw tighten. 3 other areas, the same pattern, the same scam. This wasn't some random neighbor having a bad day. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a case of someone being a little too nosy. This was organized. This was calculated. This was a deliberate, repeated scheme to intimidate property owners into giving up money, authority, or both. And Karen was at the center of it.
She must have seen the shift because her entire demeanor changed. The anger drained out of her face. The aggression disappeared. What was left was something smaller, something cornered. She looked around, at the officers, at the papers, at me, like she was searching for a way out, an escape route, an angle. Not the officers, not me, not even the wind, which had gone dead still, like the land itself was holding its breath. The truth was already out. Fake HOA, fake violations, fake authority, all of it fabricated from the ground up. But the consequences, those were very, very real. Trespassing on private property, filing a false police report, fraud, attempted intimidation, and depending on what those other cases turned up, potentially a whole lot more. Karen looked at me one last time, and in her eyes I saw a whole cocktail of emotions. Anger, frustration, desperation, maybe even a little bit of disbelief, like she genuinely couldn't fathom how this had gone so wrong. "This isn't over," she said through gritted teeth, quiet, almost a whisper, like a threat she didn't have the power to back up anymore. I met her stare, didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice even a fraction. "Oh," I said calmly, "it is." And that was it. The officers escorted her toward one of the cruisers. No shouting, no dramatic takedown, no Hollywood scene, just quiet, controlled, procedural finality, the kind of ending that doesn't need fireworks because the weight of it speaks for itself. One by one, the flashing lights went dark. Engines started, doors closed, tires crunched against the gravel, slow and deliberate, as each vehicle pulled off my property and back onto the county road. And then, silence. But not the tense silence from before.
Not the heavy, suffocating silence of confrontation. This was the other kind. The kind that comes after a storm passes. The kind that settles over the land like a blanket. The kind you can actually breathe in. I stood there for a long moment. Just stood there, my hand resting on my horse's neck. Her breathing steady. Mine finally matching. I looked out across the ranch. The barn still standing, same as it always has. The wood a little weathered, the paint a little faded, but solid, strong, built to last. The fences running straight and true along the property lines my family marked out decades ago. The open fields stretching out to the tree line, golden in the late afternoon light. All still there, all still mine. You know, I've thought a lot about what happened that day. Replayed it in my head more times than I can count, and every time I come back to the same thought. Some people think they can take control just by acting like they already have it. They think if they talk loud enough, dress sharp enough, wave a clipboard with enough conviction, people will just fall in line. They're counting on nobody asking questions. They're banking on fear, on confusion, on people being too polite or too unsure to push back. And sometimes it works. That's the scary part. Sometimes people do fall in line. Sometimes the bluff holds. Sometimes the person on the receiving end doesn't have their papers, doesn't know their rights, doesn't have the nerve to stand their ground. But that's all it ever is, a bluff. And a bluff only works until somebody calls it. If I hadn't come back that day, if I'd stayed away another week, another 2 weeks, who knows how far she would have gone? Maybe she would have changed the locks on my own gates. Maybe she would have filed a lien on my property. Maybe she would have convinced someone, some clerk,
some judge, some bureaucrat who didn't look too closely, that her fake little empire was real. But she picked the wrong ranch. She picked the wrong family. And she sure as hell picked the wrong person to try it on. Because I don't bluff, I don't fold, and I don't give up what's mine. In the end, the law didn't just protect my land, it exposed her completely. Every lie, every forgery, every fraudulent claim, all of it dragged out into the daylight where it belonged. And as I stood there watching the last police cruiser disappear down that dirt road, the sun hanging low and gold over the fields, I thought about my dad, about what he would have said if he'd been standing right there beside me. Probably would have spit on the ground, shaken his head, and muttered something like, "Some folks just don't know when to leave well enough alone." And then he would have walked to the barn, grabbed his tools, and gotten back to work. Because that's what you do. You protect what's yours, you tell the truth, and then you get back to living. And that's exactly what I did. AIK story ka script K3 parts A, in co-rewrite curl USA accent story narration style me, take me ase voiceover kurwasaku. Her part 10-minute key voiceover bunny. Okay. Part 1, the confrontation. I had just pulled into my ranch after 3 weeks away, and the first thing I saw made absolutely no sense. There were police cars parked on my land. Not one, not two, 3. Red and blue lights flashing across the barn my father built with his own hands. Officers standing around like they were waiting for something, watching. And right in the middle of it, a woman in a sharp purple suit, pointing toward my property like she owned every inch of it. I sat there for a second, engines still running, trying to process what I was seeing. This ranch had been in my family for over 40 years. Every fence post, every acre, every structure, legally ours, paid for, documented. So when I stepped out of my truck and felt gravel crunch under my boots, I wasn't confused anymore. I was angry.
As I walked closer, one of the officers glanced at me, then nudged another. Their attention shifted instantly. But before they could say anything, she turned. Sharp eyes, tight jaw, the kind of expression that didn't ask for permission, only compliance. "Finally," she said, her voice cutting through the air, "you need to leave immediately." For a moment, I actually thought she was joking. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "Excuse me?" I said. "You're standing on my land." That's when she lifted a clipboard, holding it like some kind of badge. "I'm Karen," she said, "president of the HOA. This property is in violation of multiple community standards." I looked around slowly, at the barn, at the fencing, at the horse trailer, at the open land stretching beyond, then back at her. "There is no HOA here," I said. She smiled, a slow, confident smile. "Oh," she replied, "there is now." Before I could even respond, one of the officers stepped forward. "Sir," he said calmly, "we received a complaint regarding property violations and refusal to comply with HOA enforcement." Eviction, violations, HOA enforcement, none of it made sense. And yet here they were, on my land. My horse shifted beside me, nudging my arm gently as I grabbed the reins. I ran a hand along its neck, steadying both of us. Karen stepped closer, her heels crunching against the dirt. "You've ignored multiple notices," she snapped, pointing directly at my face. "You are no longer in compliance. This land is under HOA jurisdiction." I leaned in slightly. "You mean fake notices?" I said quietly. Her expression flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. And in that moment, I knew something wasn't right. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. She wasn't just wrong. She was lying. And in less than 10 minutes, the situation that started with me being accused was about to flip completely.
Part 2, the truth unfolds. At that point, this should have been simple. Show proof, clear things up, send everyone home. But Karen wasn't backing down. If anything, she got louder. She started listing violations like she'd memorized them. Unregistered livestock, unauthorized structures, improper land use. Each word more confident than the last. To someone who didn't know better, it sounded official. But I did know better, and so did the law. I turned without another word and walked back toward my truck. Slow, calm, controlled. I opened the door, reached into the glove compartment, and pulled out a folder. Years of documentation. Land deed, county approvals, permits, everything. When I handed it to the officer, the entire energy of the scene shifted. He flipped through the pages carefully, then looked at me, then at Karen, then back at the papers again. "Ma'am," he said, his tone measured, "can you provide documentation of this HOA?" Silence. Just a brief pause, but it was enough. Karen straightened her posture. "It's newly formed," she said quickly. "We're still processing paperwork." Another officer stepped forward. "Registered with the county?" No answer. Karen's confidence started to crack. Meanwhile, one of the officers began walking around the property. He stopped near the barn, noticing something. Pinned notices. Multiple copies. All printed, all identical. He called out, "Sir, can you come here a moment?" I walked over. "You said you've been away?" he asked. 3 weeks, I replied. He nodded slowly, tapping one of the notices. These were all placed recently. I didn't even need to respond. We both knew what that meant. I turned and looked at Karen. She didn't look as confident anymore. Now the questions changed.
Did you enter this property without permission? Did you install these notices yourself? Do you have any legal authority to enforce compliance here? Karen tried to keep control, tried to talk over them, but it wasn't working. Then one officer stepped aside and made a phone call. Short, quiet. When he came back, everything changed. "There is no HOA registered anywhere in this area," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. Karen's face shifted instantly. Confidence drained, replaced by something else. Panic. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "You don't understand how these processes work." But it was too late. Because whatever this was, it wasn't just overstepping anymore. It was something bigger. And what she did next only made it worse. Part 3. The downfall. Karen lost control. "You don't understand," she snapped. "This land needs regulation. Someone has to enforce standards." That was it. That was the moment everything flipped. Because she didn't just claim authority anymore. She admitted intent, without any legal right to it. The officers stepped in immediately. "Ma'am, step back." Their tone wasn't polite anymore. It was firm, controlled, official. They began documenting everything. Photos of the notices, the vehicles, the barn, the fencing, every detail. Then another officer approached from the road, holding a folder. "This isn't the first time," he said. Everyone went quiet. He opened the folder. There have been similar complaints in nearby areas. Unauthorized enforcement, fake HOA claims, attempted fines. I felt my jaw tighten. This wasn't random. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. Karen looked around, realizing the situation had completely turned. "What is this?" she demanded. "You're making a mistake." But no one was listening anymore. The truth was already out. Fake HOA, fake violations, fake authority. Real consequences. She looked at me one last time. Anger, frustration, desperation. "This isn't over," she said. I met her stare. Calm, certain. "Oh," I replied, "it is." The officers escorted her away. No shouting, no chaos, just quiet, controlled finality. One by one, the police vehicles shut off their lights. Engines started. Gravel shifted. And then, they were gone. Silence returned. The kind of silence that only comes after something heavy finally lifts. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on my horse, looking out across the land my family built. The barn, the fences, the open fields, all still there, still mine. Some people think they can take control just by acting like they have it, by speaking loudly enough, by pretending authority. But the truth is, that only works until someone checks the facts. And if I hadn't come back that day, if no one had questioned her, who knows how far she would have gone? But she picked the wrong ranch and the wrong person. And in the end, the law didn't just protect my land, it exposed her completely.